It's always good to have an awkward hug before the presentation. I am not a genius global fellow, just so you know. Is it possible to turn down the lights a little bit? More intimate situation? Or not? Okay, thank you. So, I guess I've always been interested in inventing history. I've always been interested in inventing reality. Everything I've done is true, but a lot of the things I've done are not real. So I'm going to go back a little bit. I've always used art to sort of try and understand myself, to try and understand the world around me, to try and talk about the world around me. So we're going to go back to 2015, or actually probably earlier, 2013. And I was thinking a lot about what is required to be an artist. And it occurred to me, you need two things. You need to create this world, an artificial world, and you need to populate that world with believers. And the second thing is you need to be totally delusional. You have to think that what you're doing is of great importance. You have to believe that what you're making is extraordinary, that no one has made this thing before. And it occurred to me, it's kind of like being a dictator. So I was, at the time, obsessed with Kim Jong-il. So I did Kim Jong-Phil. So what I did was I found photographs of propaganda art in North Korea. And I sent these images to China. And I would have them recreate them as oil paintings, these massive oil paintings, but replace Kim Il-sung with me. So here's Kim Il-sung with the children. Here's me with the children. This is the massively awkward A-frame hug, which everyone is familiar with. There's me. There's Kim Il-sung's wife. There's me. I look great, by the way, if I say so myself. Then because I'm so delusional, I thought, you know what, it's not enough to stop at the paintings. I will also do a series of bronze statues of me as various dictators. So there's Kim Il-sung, there's me, there's Saddam Hussein, there's me. This next project, I swear, I know it's going to seem like I'm a pathological narcissist, but I was just very, after, well, I'll talk about this a bit. First of all, weirdly enough, this was kind of inspired by Donald Trump. I found it really fascinating how he would kind of weave truth out of lies. He would just say things and it would become true. And I thought maybe I should try this approach for my art career. So in the art world, you are nobody until somebody who's somebody says you're somebody. And I thought, well, no one super famous has ever said anything really complimentary about me. Maybe I should just invent that truth. So I made a list of all the really very famous people in the art world. Cindy Sherman, Richard Prince, Chuck Close, Larry Gagosian. I don't know if you know who he is. He's possibly the most powerful gallerist in the world, or at least in America. And I found people with the same names as them. And then I went to interview them on video and have them talk about how great I was. Hopefully this will run. I've never actually shown this in front of people.
Gary speaking. Make it in about an hour. Okay?
Larry, thank you so much for having me to see.
Gary.
Oh, so sorry. Gary. If you could just tell me how great you think I am, please.
Phil. You look like you're a very talented guy. I mean, I can see it in your face. But I don't know anything about you. Then we just met. And you're not even from LA. Well, you're a nice guy. Look like a nice guy anyway. Like in the movies, axe-murderers, they look like a nice guy at the beginning. And they chop you off afterwards.
So, thank you. I was so nervous showing you guys that. I've never shown it in public. So what was really lovely about that was when I posted some of that work on Instagram and Facebook, you could tell who had seen it and who had not seen it, because the people who hadn't watched the videos just saw, Larry Gagosian on Phillip Toledano, and they're like, "This is amazing, well done, Phil, so excited for you." But I guess with humor, but I'm just so interested in inventing truth. So this project I did in 2015. My mother died very suddenly in 2009, and I found myself taking care of my father for 3 years. And I remember so clearly the way my life was before my father called me to tell me something was wrong, and what my life was afterwards. And I've been incredibly lucky and incredibly privileged throughout my entire life. And I think that when you are lucky and when you are privileged, when you have a life that always seems to be ascending, you never consider that your life will go sideways, that things will go wrong. It's inconceivable. And I became really obsessed with this idea of the sudden right angles that life has in store for you, the sharp turns that are unforeseen, that you don't know what's going to happen. I became really obsessed with this idea. So I thought I would do a project where I would try and anticipate all the worst possible things that would happen to me in my future. My wife said I should just go and see a shrink like a normal person. But I spent 3 years doing this. But how do you research the future? You can't, because photography is always about the past. So I took a DNA test that told me what illnesses I was likely to get. I spoke to fortune tellers, tarot card readers. I was hypnotized. And then I worked with a prosthetics expert who would make me up over the course of 4 or 5 hours to become this future version of myself. And then I took acting lessons to learn how to inhabit these future selves. So this was over the course of a few hours. This is actually my favorite. So the thing that was extraordinary for me about doing this work, this took me 3 years, was not the end result. It wasn't the photograph, the image. I wasn't even taking the photographs. My assistants were. It was the doing of it. When I was 45 at the time, and when you go from 45 to 95 in the space of 4 or 5 hours, the thing about growing old is that it's imperceptible. It's such a years-long process. You don't see how the world looks at you differently. But when you go from 45 to 95 in the space of a few hours, you see clearly how the world looks at you differently. And in this case, I was invisible because I was a person at the end of my life. I was see-through. And it was such an extraordinary feeling, even just for a few hours, to sense how I was seen. We go back to Donald again, my favorite. I'm super right-wing, by the way. So AI, I guess I'd sort of dabbled with AI a little bit a year and a half ago. And then I had this idea last April, and it was a very small idea, but it kind of was an epiphany for me. And the idea was, what if Donald Trump had been born poor? What if he had not been born with all the things he had been given? What would his life be like? What would he look like? So I started making these images with AI, and it really was such an extraordinary experience because it opened up the idea of what I call historical surrealism. I feel like a lot of AI is kind of crazy, surreal, like sort of Dali-esque stuff, and I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in this kind of no man's land intersection between truth and fiction that leaves us imbalanced. I like this one. This is my favorite, and this is least likely. So after I had this kind of epiphany with the idea of historical surrealism, I thought about where we are in the world in terms of what AI means, because it's such a convincing technology that it means that for every lie, there can now be convincing truth. There can be convincing visual evidence to support anything you can think of. And I've been working on conspiracy theories for the last few years, but AI is such an extraordinarily complete tool to make such truthful-looking worlds. So I thought I would do a project where I reinvented America in the 40s and 50s. And I teamed up with a friend of mine who's a writer for The New Yorker, and he wrote these incredible stories that accompany these images. And the thing about these images are that some of them, if you look through the book, there are images that seem real, and there are images that are clearly surreal. And the idea is to always create this kind of sense of imbalance in the viewer. But the thing that was so fascinating to me and was so exciting about working with AI in this project was that I realized it's not like, it's nothing to do with photography, obviously, but it's more like making a movie. It's more like writing a book. So when you are creating this world, you have to consider everything that happens in this world. So you have to consider, what are the disasters? So, for instance, this tsunami that hits New York. What are the consequences after the disasters? And again, it's this idea of radical fiction. So, post-tsunami, radical vegetative growth throughout the city. Then you think about other things. You think about this was a story about these kind of these jellyfish created by sewage treatment plants in New Jersey that drift across into New York City, which isn't that far from the truth. Then a lot of the stories kind of reflected or echoed things that are happening now. The other thing that was really exciting for me was this idea that you can reorder the natural order of things. So, for instance, in this book, humans and animals are on the same level. They are sentient. Animals are sentient. So there's this story about these apes who become homeless. There's this story about orphans in New York City who are cared for by animals. And for me, I don't know, it's my analogy to working with AI, it's kind of like working with a really talented but very drunk person. So you have to kind of navigate, you have to make it do the things you want to do. And because I'm working with, it's tricky, because if you want to do straight surrealism, that's very easy. But if you want to start with, okay, this has to be set in the 1940s or 50s, and then on top of that, it has to be slightly surreal in a particular kind of way, that requires more effort. Another thing about doing this work was thinking, okay, why not reimagine landmarks in New York City? Why don't I invent landmarks that exist there to make this story really real? So I'd say that it's kind of a fascinating point historically where we are, because everything is true and nothing is true because of AI, because of the spectre of AI. And that's what this work is about, this idea. And I'm quite curious to see if that will matter or if it doesn't matter. Because I feel like in some ways we are so committed to our ideals, we are so committed to our tribes in some ways, that no matter what we see won't change our minds. So maybe AI won't matter. Maybe this idea, that this fear we have of it, will be misplaced. Or maybe not. Thank you so much.